From EPAWA Weather Consulting, headquartered in Worth Hall, Pennsylvania, this is Weather Weeklies, an informative video of the ins and outs of weather that affect you most in the EPAWA coverage area. The thoughts and opinions expressed in this video are those of the forecaster alone and may not reflect those of the staff of EPAWA Weather Consulting LLC as a whole, nor its constituents. Now, without further ado, here is meteorologist Bobby Martrich with Weather Weeklies.
Good morning and welcome to another edition of Weather Weeklies for Sunday, December 29th. I'm EPAWA meteorologist Bobby Martrich. We're going to go through a lot of information today with the upcoming pattern change that we have had forecasted for a while, which seems to be on social media, the way people are reacting now that they can physically see it on a model instead of listening to some guy like me talk about it weeks in advance, or having this big revelation like, oh no, we're going to get this very cold pattern and finally some snow to go with it. So this is not news to us. We were getting tagged on social media about it. Listen, if you don't watch these videos that I do or read the long range that we do every single Friday, you're missing out, because everybody that does and has knew this was coming. This isn't a surprise to us. This is kind of like the no crap moment, right? Before I get into too much in the video, I want to bring the attention to this, which is the mid-season winter weather alerts. So we have the text alerts that we start with the program on November 1st every single year. They're $34.99 for one county for the alerts and $44.99 from two monitoring counties. This has now been discounted over 30% because we are late December. And this will be for the period going forward. So if you were holding off on these alerts, but you're like, I don't want to spend that kind of money now because it's already, the season has already started and I already missed out on some of the program. Well, now they're discounted as of December 25th. We always do that every year. We lower the price here for the remainder of winter. So it is at a discounted rate. Check that out. You can just look for this banner below the video on the website or on the homepage of the website. Any of the forecast regions have this. Look for this banner here. You just click on it. It'll take you right there. If you don't want to do that, you want to do it direct, there is the URL. It's kind of a long URL, but it's if you just click on this banner, it's a lot easier. It takes you right there, and you'll be able to get those text alerts. If you are one of those that held off because you're waiting for the action to start a little bit later in the season, you can now benefit from having a discounted rate for the remainder of this year. So let's take a look at year-to-date snowfall. Now, this is behind in most areas except for in Scranton-Wilkes-Barre, which is 19.3. This is where you should be normal snowfall year-to-date thus far. Don't be discouraged by this, because we have some opportunities going forward here, and some decent opportunities at that, and we'll get to that in this video, of course. One particular location here is still red. That's Allentown. Year-to-date, you see it's only 0.3 behind, but this month, it is the only location out of the entirety of our region that is above average. So average for the month of December is 4.6. This 4.8 fell all of this month. So December will finish above average in Allentown, Lehigh Valley, and probably southeast PA too, and interior South Jersey, where they don't keep the records. So we had that snowfall last week that really helped with that. Whereas, Philadelphia's on the board here, but they really haven't had much of anything. The reason it's behind overall in Allentown is because there was no snow in November, and you're usually expecting about 0.7 in November, so we didn't get there or whatever. But elsewhere is below average in December, including the Scranton-Wilkes-Barre areas. 12.5 of this fell in that late November storm, okay, where the rest of the region really didn't get too much of that. So this month, you're technically slightly below, very slightly, but slightly below average here in the Scranton-Wilkes-Barre area. We'll see if we can get anything with that. Maybe, I don't think we're going to be adding to that for the remainder of this month. So you're probably going to be slightly below average there, even though year to date you're obviously almost 9 inches above average snowfall. So let's get into our projections. This is from our Friday long-range outlook. December is at the end here. We didn't include February yet. That'll be included next week, okay, because we have to flip the calendar months here. December as a whole, these are the numbers that we projected that it's going to finish. The rain that we're getting now isn't going to be a lot, but it's going to be enough to get us in that near to slightly below average threshold for precipitation. Near to slightly below average temperatures, because of this warm surge at the end of the month, is going to bump it up. We were kind of like anywhere from 3 to 5 degrees below average leading into this milder period, which is most notably going to be today. with that synoptically driven warmth. It's not going to be enough to skew the entire month, but it does bump it up closer to average, but still going to finish slightly below here in December, which was our projection since November. So this is not surprising. We did have it -2 to 1 to 4 to start out the month, but that we adjusted along the way and settled with this and kind of maintained that for the last couple weeks. And near to slightly below average snowfall for some areas. Again, Allentown's going to finish above. Philadelphia's going to finish below, and slightly below around there. But I get you that area right around, say, interior western, northwestern New Jersey, all the way down through southeast PA. If they kept records, they would probably be above average there, or slightly above average there as well, or at least near average. Okay, so for January, we are right now. Now this is to take this with a grain of salt, because there's some signs here that this -1 to -3 might be not low enough. It might end up being more like 3 to 5 degrees below average, but I don't want to go nuts just yet. We'll see how this upcoming pattern transpires, and there's still some questions toward the end of the month what it's going to do, but it's becoming a little bit more clear now. Near average precipitation we have, again, for now. I think overall the month is near average, but there'll be some drier periods in there when that extreme cold gets in there, and then toward the end of the month and heading into February, I think it turns wetter. So we have near average as that balances out, and then slightly above average snowfall. Again, that could go up too. It has that chance to do that, depending on whether or not we get some storms in our storm signal period, which we'll discuss in this video. So the background state of our ENSO has not been officially declared a weak La Nina yet, but it's, again, dangerously close. It continues to cool in some of these regions here. And because the Nino 1 and 2 region, which is closest to the Peruvian coast, is still in ENSO neutral territory, and some of these other ones, Nino 4 is still in ENSO neutral, they haven't declared it the official flip to weak La Nina yet, but for all intents and purposes, it's a negative ENSO. It's not behaving like an La Nina typically does, but the weaker a La Nina is, less southeast ridge influence that you have, and you don't have to have these warm episodes dominating in winter like you have on some years. We had some La Nina years recently, and not last year, but the year before that, and the year before that, we had some southeast ridge influences and a lot of mild conditions for those winters. This is not behaving like that at all. And the big reason for that and why we were able to see this pattern coming is the Madden-Julian oscillation and that progression. So we always talked about the Madden-Julian oscillation. Like, this is a transitional phase in phase 7. That's where we're at right now. This is phase 8 is just the mecca. That is the ultimate pattern for winter and snowstorms and cold. So this is a cold phase. Phase 1 is a cold phase. Phase 2 is a cold phase. So look where it's heading, right into these cold phases before the GFS extended takes it, collapses it into the circle of death in the second half of the month. But where it comes from is important, because there's going to be lingering effects when it gets in this null phase in the middle. See this progression like this? It's kind of collapsing like this. When it gets in the null phase, it's whatever pattern it came from or whatever phase it came from will continue to linger for a while. So if you're coming from a cold phase, that cold is going to linger, and that's why we have such an extended period of cold coming up. And the same thing happening here with the extended European model going into phase 8 and then 1. Doesn't really get into 2 so much. It collapses into circle death. It just kind of hangs out there, but still favoring the cooler side of the circle here. So this is why the European extended is aggressive, taking the cold all the way into the first 10 days of February, where it's going to be at least slightly below average at that point. I think the coldest period that we're going to deal with during this stretch is going to be during the second week and third week of this month, where we're going to have some brutally cold temperatures settling in at part of that time frame. So that's going to be the worst of it. Then it kind of relaxes at the end of the month, but it's still slightly below average. It's not as crazy below average as it will be in weeks 2 and 3. Week 4 and heading into February are slightly below average, it looks like, or at least leaning that way as we're thinking right now. And a large part of why this progression into phase 8 and 1 is happening is because you see here where the 7, 8, and 1 phases are out here. This is where the best convection is, right in those particular areas, which is getting close to, if not passing, the international date line. And that makes sense because that's where the warm pole is. Okay, typically in a La Nina, you see the best forcing out here in the maritime continent, which is phases 4 and 5. In this case, it's out here. This is where the warmest temperatures are in the entire globe. So this is farther east. It's allowing the Kelvin wave responsible for the MJO phases to move further eastward, and that's getting close to the date line, which is out here. So this is phase 8, phase 1 out here, and that's why you're seeing that on the models, and that's why you're seeing this progression. That's why you're seeing that. So why is that so important? Well, in a phase 7, this is a pretty good pattern. You get a cross-polar flow and the EPO getting going here. You got to get some ridging going into Alaska, and you get a cross-polar flow bringing some colder temperatures in here. We're still feeling the effects right now of where it was prior, which was in phase 6, okay? So phase 7 is the start of the cold pattern. You get a little bit of blocking up here in Greenland as well. This is a typical phase 7 in January in a negative ENSO, which we are definitely in, right? Look what we get to when we get to phase 8. Watch what happens. This is the absolutely ultimate pattern. You got blocking, you got a cross-polar flow, you got an EPO, you got a very strong ridge out here, and the trough goes like this. So this is a very good pattern for cold and snow. It's a cold and stormy pattern with blocking up here as well. So there's a lot of things going into this that will signal that we're going to get into a very good pattern, at least during the second week of the month, or the beginning of the second week of January. Once we get beyond there, I think we're going to have a relaxation period where you're not going to see, you'll just be cold and dry. Ever hear somebody say it's too cold to snow? That has some merit in this case, because it's going to be so cold that the baroclinic boundary is going to be forced so far south, almost to Florida actually, and the storm track is going to be pushed further south as well as a result of that. So the only thing you can get when it's that cold is some maybe fast-moving northern stream systems that come through, but that's about it. But that would be after, like when we get toward the end of the second week of January, and maybe part of the third week as well. It's not until after that we get back into a more active pattern when the pattern relaxes a little bit and it's not so brutally cold. Okay, here is again, this is what phase 8 looks like in a negative ENSO in January. Phase 8, whether you're in an El Nino or a La Nina, neutral, whatever, it's a pretty darn good pattern, okay? A phase 8 is like the Mecca, so to speak, right? Here's what it had. Here's the models are responding to with the phase 8 MJO influence in week 2, and this is textbook. This is absolutely textbook. You have negative EPO and ridging in the western United States. You have a negative NAO up here, all right? This is your blocking, your Atlantic block. So you got a Pacific block and an Atlantic block, and then you have a cross-polar flow coming across like this, and you got a storm signal right in there, and that is in that January 6th through 9th period, okay? That's the period we're highlighting for our winter storm signal, and you can see the EPO is going to stay negative for a long time. Pay attention to the green line here, not these ups and downs of the blues. That's the control run, but the green stays largely negative for this entire period for the next couple of weeks, which is really going to drive the pattern. It did so in 2013, 2014 winter when we flipped in January and then we stayed cold for a while. This is very similar in that regard, but in 2013, 2014, we also had this warm pool extended further east. So this is not a surprise. It's responding to this, okay? And everything is kind of falling in line with that. So when you have a trough in the Gulf of Alaska here, and you have a positive EPO, you have the mild air infiltrating the country, warm Pacific air coming across the country. We're getting a bit of that now with these systems that are cutting to the northwest. We'll have another one here on New Year's Eve going into the overnight. But once that flips, once the EPO flips, which is doing right now, it's positive right now. You see the beginning of this. It's still on the positive side right here, but then it goes negative after that point, right? Kind of falls like that, and it stays on the negative side. Once that flips, you get a cross-polar flow and the cold coming back into the country, and there might be some blocking to help with that as well. So that also helps with locking the cold. And we didn't talk about the NAO too much because we haven't been negative NAO for a while. But when you have a blocking high here, it helps with that transport, cross-polar flow transport, and also allows for some storms along the East Coast. And that's why we have that period between the 6th and 9th highlighted for a winter storm signal. Here is the NAO projections over the next couple weeks, and again, it's going to remain negative because of that. It just matters. The only thing that is uncertain with the NAO yet is whether it's going to be east or west based. That's still to be determined, which is going to set up storm tracks and where they go. But we'll cover that here in the next couple of weeks. I think it's going to be very busy here in the beginning of the second week, late first week of January, and beginning of the 6th to 9th frame is what we're looking for. Here's the temperature periods we're looking at. So mild right now, and then you got all this cold coming in here, and it's going to stick around for a while, it looks like. This goes for a long time. Again, during the second week and third week of January, you're going to be brutally cold for part of that time frame there. And you can better see this here on using the Lehigh Valley International Airport, which is our centermost point of our coverage region in Allentown, Lehigh Valley International Airport. Normal high there today is 40, obviously well above right now with the synoptically driven warmth that's going to last through New Year's Day. And then after that, takes a nosedive south. This is the ensemble here. It might actually be colder than this. This is averaging 50 different members. So the average high here goes from 40 to 38. That's where that red line is. And you can see we're doing one of these numbers here. Ooh, and just going to keep going down here like this. Okay, so we're going to tank as far as temperature. So I hope you have all your heating oil or propane, whatever you use for your fuel source in winter. I hope you have that filled because you're going to need it, as it's going to be brutally cold coming in here in the coldest climatological period of the year already, and then you're going to have add in 10 to 15 degrees below average temperatures when it's already the coldest point of the year. It's going to be pretty nasty here. It's going to be extended for a long period of time. So looking at the extended ensembles, this is looking for beyond this. This is going all the way through early February. This is what the extended ensembles are showing, where you have this transition to cold and it just locks in weeks 2 and week 3. It does start to moderate a little bit, but it's still slightly below average. It's not getting back to warm again. It's going to stay slightly below average, according to the European ensemble, and now the GFS ensemble, extended ensemble, all the way into February. Okay, the European extended ensemble goes all the way to the February 10th period. And then it stops. That was a little bit large. Sorry, excuse me, February 11th, but you can still see in early February it is slightly below average as well. So this is going to coincide, we think, with a wetter turn at the end of the last full week of the month of January, and then the first 10 days or so of February are going to be a wetter period. And if you're slightly below average, that means you're going to have more storms down the pipeline too. Again, I think you're going to have that 6th to 9th period to watch. After that, we probably just remain cold and dry for a little while. And then when we get toward the end of the month and then February, we pick up again. As long as this stays, and it's been pretty consistently showing this. It hasn't wavered from this idea that all the way into early February, it's going to remain at least slightly below average. And here's the 7-day snowfall from that same model. And you see there's a big storm threat right here in that 6th and 9th frame. But then it relaxes a little bit where you're not getting, it's kind of colder and drier, northern stream systems maybe. And then you get into early February, you get another shot here of some snow as the colder temperatures remain in place. So we'll have opportunities going forward. I do want to focus on the 6th to 9th period, though, because that's what everybody's worried about. Now, before I get into this, understand that there are two different waves. Two different distinct waves. There's one closer to the 6th, there's one closer to the 9th. What the one on the 6th does sets up the ones on the 9th and vice versa, okay? So the European model, and I have this running slower on purpose, brings an overrunning situation here where you start off with snow, go over to ice, and then maybe rain before it ends, right? And then it focuses, the big snowstorm potential is actually with the second one, which is the January 9th time frame. And you see that right there, okay? So that's the end of it. This is a pretty sizable storm, verbatim to the European model. I mean, we're talking about some 18 to 18 plus inches of snow if this were, in fact, going to happen this way. But there is a lot of differences between one model and the next, and then run to run, or these are going to change a lot. Now, this is day 10, day 11, right? So you're forecasting out there a ways. It sees something there. It just doesn't know which wave to focus on. And that's the problem. So it has this first wave. They both have. Your GFS has this wave as well. It's a little colder with that first wave, so it's more snow. And it gives you like a 4 to 8, 6 to 12 inch snowfall. It's a decent snowfall. But in this case, the baroclinic boundary from that first one, when this goes through, since it's cuts further to the northwest, isn't as far southeast. So it lays the tracks basically for the second one, right? The baroclinic boundary isn't too far off to the south. It gets cold, but it's not brutally cold just yet. And that allows this storm to track up the coast and nail us, in this case, on the European guidance. On the GFS, again, it's colder with this system here on January 6th, and it's mostly snow across the majority of our region, maybe a little mixing further south, right? But then it sets this baroclinic boundary so far south, all the way to northern Florida here with these heights. So anything coming in after that, which would be the January 9th wave, which this is right here, goes all the way to the south along that baroclinic boundary. It's way south. See that? It's right there. It ends up being way off the coast and way southeast because that baroclinic boundary, instead of being here, whoop, sorry, didn't mean to do that. There we go. Instead of it being more like this, it's digging down like this. Okay, so that is why the storm tracks are different. So this baroclinic boundary is going to be important. That first storm is going to set up the second one. We're going to focus on this period as, even though we have one winter storm signal between the 6th and 9th, we're going to consider these two separate waves because there's going to be two different ones in that time frame. Could you get hit by both? Yes, but I will tell you, if this one is, like the European model shows, ends up being a little bit snowier, you have less likely to see the big storm of this with the one that follows here. The bigger potential is going to be with the second one, I think. But the first one, if it remains mostly or all snow, is still a sizable snowstorm. But we have no idea where that gradient's going to be at this point. And when you're looking at day 10 to day 11, trying to forecast ahead, trying to get these boundaries and know exactly where they're going to be is kind of an effort and futility. We do have the ensembles that we can lean on a little bit better in this time frame. Here's the European ensemble, and this is January 6th. It has that first wave here with some snow, at least, most notably north, because it changes over to ice or whatever. And then a couple days later, it has the second one here as well. It could be one or the other or both, or, it could be one of those situations where the first one's kind of like a mix of nonsense and the second one is more snow, but we'll see. But it could do this too, where the GFS is showing where it hits harder with the first one, and you get a 4 to 8, 6 to 12 inch type snowstorm right across the region. And then the second one is so far southeast because the baroclinic boundary is just not there. So a lot of things, a lot of ifs right now, but I love that period between the 6th and 9th to produce something. Okay, it might not be a gigantic snowstorm. Is that a possibility? We get out of this with very little in terms of snow. Yeah, it's possible. We'll see. It's going to be area dependent, but this has a potential of high upside as well. Okay, so that's kind of how we're messaging it right now. Just a storm signal. It's not a guarantee for apocalyptic snow at any location, right? Even though that the previous run of the GFS last night was completely different as well. So that's what I'm saying. Run to run, they change. And model to model, they're changing. They're disagreeing on which wave to focus on for the better potential. I would think the second one has the better potential to be as far as an upside is concerned, because of course with this second one, if this does play out like this, like the European model has it, and it might be a snow to mix to rain type situation around the 6th. This is a Miller A coming out of the Gulf here that has a lot of moisture to work with. So if the baroclinic boundary is there and it's allowing this to come up the coast like this, you could get a pretty sizable snowstorm in this case. So just to recap, milder temperatures last through New Year's Day, and then cold follows the New Year's Eve system, which is going to be a rain system, next Thursday and beyond. So that's going to be Thursday onward next week. It's going to be cold, and it's going to stay cold. Colder temperatures relative to average in January. In snowfall, we maintain projections above average. Again, that might change to be a little bit colder than we have it now. We have slightly below average temperatures, -1 to -3. It might actually be colder than that, depending on how much snow cover you get. That's another thing. If you have a lot of snow cover on the ground, that cold air mass is going to be even more effective. So we might have to adjust that down from the slightly below average to maybe solidly below if we get a decent amount of snow on the ground, and then you get the cold temperatures. You're going to get some really cold temperatures. So we're not looking, instead of looking like this, where you're in the 20s here, lower to mid 20s, you might be in the teens for highs instead because there's a lot of snow cover on the ground, but we don't know that yet. In the wake of that system, though, January 9th period is right in here, right? After that, it has temperatures in the low to mid 20s here. This could end, if we get a sizable snowstorm prior to this and there's a lot of snow on the ground, it's going to be colder than that. I can tell you that right now. Okay? So that's a big thing to consider as well. Watching the 6th to 9th period for a legitimate winter storm threat. How impactful it will be is to be determined. Additional storm threats were likely to follow the first, but that's not going to be, I think, when we get toward the end of the month and then heading into February, we'll have additional signals at that point. Again, when you get that cold, it's a cold and dry pattern typically because it's, like I said, it's kind of like, it's almost too cold to snow. It can snow at any temperature, but the baroclinic boundary is what we're talking about here. And if it's too far southeast, the storm tracks will go south of us as well, and they'll be suppressed. So that could be good for like the deep south in Carolinas, where they could get some snow out of that. But for our area, we would need a baroclinic boundary a little bit further to the northwest and we'll see how that transpires here in the next couple weeks. I'm EPAWA meteorologist Bobby Marchus. That's this edition of Weather Weeklies for Sunday, December 29th. Join us again next week. We'll be firmly in the pattern change at that point, and we'll have a short-term update, I'm sure, at that point of what's going to be happening between that 6th and 9th frame, because next Sunday, of course, is right before that, so we'll have a firm idea at that point, certainly. But this week is going to be fun to follow along in the daily forecast videos. So I will see you again next week. Take care.